So happy to be here with you guys today to talk about how you can rewrite your life story when something traumatizing happens to you. In 2016, my photographer and I were sent to cover the Charlotte riots. You may remember that a man named Keith Scott failed to comply with officers' commands, and he was shot and killed. Protests and then riots ensued, and we were sent to cover those. So what you are about to hear and see is part of my coverage that night, and then my colleagues' reaction to what happened to us.
And then when someone makes an aggressive move, they take that person into custody. And that's what's been happening all night long. The police rush forward, take the aggressor into custody, put them behind the police line, and then push the crowd back. And that's kind of the pattern that we've seen all night.
Mary, stay safe out there.
Okay, I will, JR. Thank you so much.
All right, that report from Mary Sturgill was filed a short time ago, about an hour or so ago. And right after that report was filed, Andrea, things went south for Mary and her photographer, Eric Alkire.
Yeah, this was one of the scariest things that we've seen here at News 19. We were sitting around in the newsroom, obviously preparing to bring you this newscast and watching live feeds from downtown where we saw somebody that looked like our chief photographer, Eric, and it turns out it was Eric. He was hit in the back of the head from a protester and fell on the ground. Right there he is. Right near a can that was on fire.
So Eric is right there, and Eric was hit in the back of the head. Mary was actually tackled by one of these instigators tonight. You know,
this is just on a personal level really upsetting. We just were watching this live and just watched two of our friends get assaulted on live TV. This is upsetting for a lot of reasons, but one, you know, protesting violence. People are using violence. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, JR, but really on the streets.
So let me tell you what happened from my perspective. Right after I filed that report, I looked down and I realized that our battery to our live unit was dead, and so we decided to go back to our live truck and charge it before we had another hit at 11 o'clock. As we rounded the corner to the Time Warner Cable Arena, a skinny kid in a wife beater ran between my photographer and myself, and he grabbed the cord that goes from the camera down to the live backpack unit. And I thought to myself, oh, that silly kid, he accidentally grabbed our cord. And then I saw his intent. He had the cord in his hands like this, and he was trying to pull my photographer into that nearby fire. I jerked the cord back, and as I did that, Eric, my photographer, turned to see what was behind him. When he did that, another attacker punched him and knocked him out, and he went down to the ground. I turned to try to get that attacker off of him, and when I did that, a third attacker tackled me from behind. And on the video that my colleagues were watching, this live feed, you could see my attacker skip around, gauging his stride, just like a football kicker does, to hit me at the second time with the maximum impact. The thing that stopped the attack were two women who swooped in. And when they swooped in, it seemed like our attackers left. And then we were helped to the curb and then onto the hospital. And however, it was the kindness of those two women in the midst of all that chaos that stopped the attack. Now, in the following months, I began to fall into what I call the hole. I began to get irritable at work. And I began to not be able to concentrate on anything. I could not pitch a story idea in our editorial meetings to save my life. I was emotional. I sat in my car every day trying to muster up enough courage to walk through the doors to face whatever I had to face that day. I began to have panic attacks, and I began to have migraines, and I began to miss work. And I began to think of suicide. Now, let me describe to you kind of the anxiety and the fear that I was living in at that point in time. You know, every year during the state fair, news people have to go to the state fair and greet the public. And I was having a really hard time with crowds at that point in time. And so when someone would come in front of me, I would try my best to concentrate on them and not see all the chaos going on behind them. And if they asked for an autograph, I would write a positive affirmation to them so to try to quell the anxiety that was rising up into my throat and about to spill over with tears. On this particular day, I was running practically to my car, and this man grabbed my arm. And when he grabbed my arm, I clenched my fist. And then he said to me, "Mary, I am so sorry what happened to you in Charlotte." You guys, I almost hit this man who was just being nice to me. And so, as you can imagine, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And in my research as a journalist, I discovered that journalists and first responders sometimes can get what's called cumulative PTSD. Because we see and we cover all of these horrific events throughout our careers, then when something happens to us, it's boom, there you are and you have it. Well, I want to back up to about 5 months before the attack. I was heading back to the station to put my story together for the 11 o'clock news, and a woman ran a red light, and she hit me, and my car flipped 3 times. And I hit my head, hurt my shoulder and my neck and my back, and we came down so hard that it broke the wheel right off the axle. So for months after that accident, remember these things? Hopefully none of us are old enough to remember these things, but this is what I felt like. I felt like I had one of those old-timey diving helmets on my head, and I wore that thing around for months, actually well into September. And it's kind of funny, though, the things that you think of during this time, when something like this happens. The minute I landed, I didn't take stock of was I okay. I thought, oh my God, I just wrecked a company car. So I dove into the passenger's floorboard where everything that I owned went and tried to retrieve my cell phone so I could call them and tell them I wrecked a company car. And when I rose up, there was this little man in front of the car and he was screaming, "She's alive!" But that's when the car began to fill with smoke. So it wasn't quite so funny at that moment. And he runs over to the passenger door to try to kick the window in, and then another gentleman was trying to get the driver's side door open. Finally he did. It seemed like forever. Finally he did, and I was able to get out. But only 4 days before this happened, I had given a speech called "The Scar: How to Rip the Band-Aid Off Even When It Hurts." And when you think of a scar, you think of a wound, right? And that wound is trying its best to heal. But it's still there. The scar is the symbol of that wound, right? And so the SCAR is actually an acronym that was born out of my life. And it stands for Strength, Care, Affirmations, and Repeat. When I was 1, my mother left my father with 4 children under the age of 4. I grew up in extreme poverty. I survived a rape in college and an abusive relationship in my early 20s. And I have come to believe that all of those things that happen to you in your life create in you what I call your identity illusion. And it is an illusion of who you think you are. It's that voice inside your head that says you are not good enough. It's that voice that says you are not strong enough, you are not pretty enough, you are not thin enough, and your mother left you, so obviously you aren't lovable enough. So, in a moment of clarity, I realized that I have the tools to overcome this current trauma that I was in. And so I reached into my toolbox and I reached out to a yoga teacher who I'd done a story on, who was working with soldiers with PTSD. And my identity illusion did not shut up right away. I still had problems. But it wasn't until I went to a deep guided meditation yoga retreat that I was able to get some help. And if you've ever been into a deep guided meditation, raise your hand if you have. Some of you have, yeah. Then you know sometimes you fall asleep, right? And sometimes you see cats. That's what I did. I saw cats. Granted, I love cats. I have one. That one on the lower left right there is my cat. But they are not what helped me that day. Dr. Wayne Dyer said that when you pray, you talk to God. And when you meditate, he talks to you. Well, during that meditation, when the instructor said, think of an adjective that describes you, I thought broken. And then later in the guided meditation, she said, think of the opposite. And as if it was a neon sign flashing in my head, the words, "You are not broken," flashed in my mind's eye. You are not broken. And then after the talk, or after the meditation, she, as if she was talking to me, said, those feelings that you are feeling right now, the feeling of being broken, is not you. It's just a feeling. It's not you. So in all the years of doing yoga and meditating, I've tried to live a more mindful life. And I've realized that those thoughts that we have turn into feelings, and those feelings turn into emotions. And most of the time, especially if they're negative, they should be fleeting. So at a time in my life when my identity illusion was telling me that I'm not strong enough to get through this trauma, that the only peace that would come, I'm going to say that again for the camera, that the only peace that would come is from bowing out of my life, I realized that I am strong, despite all of that, despite what my identity illusion said to me. I've run 26 marathons and half marathons in my life. I rose out of poverty to become a nationally award-winning journalist. And more importantly, I am a kind person who cares about those around her. And I knew that I was strong enough to make it through this. So as I began to take the time to take care of myself, I relieved myself of the overwhelming stressors. I took a leave of absence from work. I was meditating, I was doing yoga, and I was going to therapy. That is when I found my strength again. And here's where the affirmations come in. We have to take all of those negative thoughts in our heads and rephrase them into positive affirmations. So you guys are going to do this with me. Everybody stand up. Stand up. And I want you to repeat after me. I am strong. I am strong. I am never broken. I am never broken. Give yourself a round of applause. You may be seated. Now, I know that felt kind of awkward for some of you, but I want you to remember, in your time of depression, or when you feel like you're in a hole like I was, think back to this awkward moment, okay? And remember that you are strong. Okay, so it's through those affirmations that I was able to continue this healing process. And then here's where the repeat comes in. People close to us will die. Someone in your family is going to get cancer probably. Life happens, and sometimes it is traumatizing. But do what I did and take the cue from the two women who saved me that day. To always show kindness in the midst of chaos, especially to yourself. And by the way, as a journalist, I had to research the cats. And in many traditions, I found out that they symbolize strength, healing, and change. Thank you.